This is the second series of talks on the Eightfold Path. But because the Eightfold Path is actually comprises the entire teaching of the Buddha, so I think it's more important that after the end of my session, you have some reference that you could follow up. Yeah. So I think, as I mentioned the previous week, if you were with me in the previous sessions, that one of the best books that I've come across is this one by Bhante Gunaratana. It's called 8 Mindful Steps to Happiness, which I introduced to you the previous week. So if you manage to get hold of this book, I hope you would actually dive into it and then look into every aspect of the Eightfold Path. Yeah. So as you can see, the two keywords there are mindful steps and happiness. All right. So the entire Buddhist teachings, you can say, is summed up into how can we find happiness in life. For those of you who are familiar with the early teachings of the Buddha, you find that his very first discourse that he gave, which is called Setting in Motion the Wheel of the Law, or the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, where he talks about the Four Noble Truths, and the fourth of the Four Noble Truths is where he talks about the Eightfold Path. Yeah, so that's what we are going to discuss very briefly. So I thought the best is if you could get hold of this book by Bhante Gunaratana, which talks about how these various steps that leads to happiness, and with all grounded in these very important aspects of mindfulness. As you would recall in my previous session, the Eightfold Path actually starts with the wisdom aspects, which is in the sense that we need to understand what is correct view of existence. All right. So while we say yes, the foundation is actually morality, which we're going to talk about today, but before we can even put into action or into practice what the Buddha regard as a moral or ethical way of life, we need to have right understanding, firstly, of what is morality, and secondly, why do we need to have certain ethical factors in our life. Okay, so last week we talked about having right understanding or right view, which allows us then to move on into practicing what the Buddha calls the subsequent steps to happiness. And today we're going to talk about two aspects on the action part, which is about how do we practice the Eightfold Path in terms of the body and in terms of speech. Okay, but all this again boils back to the very essence of the Buddha's teaching, which is about how we can find happiness. So I thought I'll just introduce to you again this very interesting book and also very successful book. It's called The Art of Happiness by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, where in the book on page 3 at the beginning of this book, he says that I believe that the very purpose of our life is to seek happiness. Now we ask ourselves when we wake up each morning, what do we look for? Do we look for happiness, or do we look for sadness and suffering? We all look for happiness. We all want to be happy, right? So His Holiness says that I believe that the very purpose of our life is to seek happiness. And that is clear. So whether you believe in religion, whether you're a Buddhist, you're not a Buddhist, whether you believe in this particular religion or that religion, we are all seeking something better in life. So he says, I think the very motion of our life is towards happiness. So if you look at the Buddha's teachings, in fact, many people have the misconception that the Buddha only talks about suffering. And so therefore Buddhism becomes very pessimistic. But actually, if you dive deeper into the teachings itself, you realize that actually, just as is mentioned in the first discourse, the Buddha says only one thing do I teach: suffering and how to overcome suffering. So people sometimes forgot the second aspect. How do we overcome suffering? Okay, and how do we overcome suffering? The Buddha has enunciated in what he called the Eightfold Path. And remember, as I said, it's the Eightfold Path. It's not a one-fold path. So many people today thought that their entry into Buddhism is only through meditation. Well, meditation, of course, is very important. It's a key component of the religion, key component of the Buddha's teachings. But there's many other aspects that constitutes what would make us a happy, a calm, and a more peaceful person. Okay, so today we're going to look into the second aspect, having understood the right perspective of how we look at life. Okay, so here the Eightfold Path, I think you all know this, probably you would have learned this in Sunday school, all right, so I'm not going to go into details. So the Noble Eightfold Path, we talk about it, right view, right intention. And today we're going to just touch very briefly on right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And the following week, we've got right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, but we're going to focus a little bit more on mindfulness. And in particular, the difference between what is called secular mindfulness today and right mindfulness as found in the Buddha's teachings. So we'll take it up the following week. But for today, let's look at the right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And how can that be actually applied in our everyday life, right? So let's look at the first one. Now, in Bhante Gunaratana's book, I've extracted this from his book itself, page 91, for those of you who have got a copy of his book. He says that the Buddha considered the practice of skillful speech. Now, he has used the word skillful speech, right? Which is a translation of the Pali word skillful as samma. Sometimes we translate as right speech, right? So he has used skillful. So has considered the practice of skillful speech as essential to one's personal and spiritual development, that he gave it its own step on the path to happiness. So do you realize that in the Eightfold Path itself, speech itself has got a special a special step, so to speak, among the Eightfold, right? And here the Buddha is talking about skillful speech comprising 4 qualities. It is always truthful, it is uplifting, not malicious or unkind, it is gentle, not crude or harsh, it is moderate, not useless or meaningless. Now, this morning, you all recited the 5 precepts, isn't it? So the precept, the 4th precept of not lying, is just one aspect of what is found as in the Eightfold Path as right speech. Okay, so you can actually expand the 4th precept which you have undertaken this morning to encompass the 3 other qualities. Of course, the first one is there. It is always truthful. It is uplifting, not malicious or unkind. It is gentle, not crude or harsh. It is moderate, not useless or meaningless. We'll expand a little on that. But before we go again, let me just remind you, because I mentioned this the previous week, that when we talk about all the factors in the Eightfold Path, 3 very important aspects come into play. Last week, we focused on right view, where we understand what is, then with that, you understand what is wrong speech as wrong speech and right speech as right speech. So the right view part is very important. That's why we talk about the previous week. And if you remember, I also mentioned that in the previous week that right view comprises primarily the view that every action has consequences, right? Every action has consequences. And the Buddha's discovery is that good actions inevitably lead to good results, and unskillful actions lead to unskillful results. So that is the right view component, which is the understanding of the law of karma, right? So you understand wrong speech as wrong speech and right speech as speech. But for us to have right speech, we need 2 other things. We need to have effort and we need to have mindfulness, all right? So you must always make the effort to abandon wrong speech and to enter into right speech, okay? And then likewise, effort must always be accompanied by right mindfulness. And mindfully, one abandons wrong speech. Mindfully, one enters upon and abides in right speech. So you see, these 2 components, they are actually necessary. That is why when you go for meditation classes, you learn to calm your mind, and you also learn to cultivate right mindfulness. Right? So for right speech to be effective, first we need to have right views, and then we need to make efforts, and then we need to put into practice what is right mindfulness. Now, there's a lot that has been discussed on these 3 aspects. You can find this in the Mahachattari Sakha Sutta. So this is an entire discourse which explains the Eightfold Path in great details, right? So if you want a very traditional scriptural explanation of the Eightfold Path, this discourse is highly recommended. It's called the Discourse of the Great 40, Sutta 117. All right. So this discourse actually go into detail. If you remember the first discourse that the Buddha gave, Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha did not really explain details on what is right speech, right action, right mindfulness, and so on. So, but he mentions that, he enumerates that. So you want details, it is found in the Mahachattarisakha Sutta, right, where the Buddha goes into details on the Eightfold Path. So I just highlighted this to you, a summary of that sutta, to explain to you the three important factors circle around right speech. Now, the first slide, which I took from Bhante Gunaratana's book, which he has very kindly summarized for us, are the four things, if you remember. So again, these things are explained in details in another discourse which the Buddha gave, which I just mentioned here because I think you have access to my slides. So I would really like you to, after this session, to go and read this particular discourse. It's called the Magga Vibhanga Sutta. It's in the Samyutta Nikaya. And he explains there about what is meant by skillful speech. So this discourse is an analysis of the path, an analysis of the Eightfold Path. All right, it talks about you abstain from lying, which is what we recited this morning in our in our 5 precepts. And then you abstain from slander, you abstain from harsh speech, and then you abstain from idle chatter. All right. Now, these 4 things is what constitutes skillful speech. So it's not just abstaining from lying. So there's 3 other aspects to it. Okay. So again, details are found in the Magga Vibhanga Sutta. Now, there's another discourse the Buddha gave. All right. So you see, I deliberately just take snippets of each of these because it will be quite difficult to actually go into details. But I've given you the what do you call it, the name of the discourse there. Hopefully that, you know, at the end of today's session, you will also make reference to it. Here the Buddha says, what is a well-spoken speech? He said, monks, a statement endowed with 5 factors is well-spoken, not ill-spoken. Right? It is blameless and unfaulted by knowledgeable people. Which 5? So he says that it must be spoken at the right time. It is spoken truthfully. It is spoken affectionately. It is spoken beneficially. And it is spoken with a mind of goodwill. Now, you find that in this discourse itself, there's a new factor, a new element that has been brought in now. And what is that new element? What is that new factor? It's the first one, right? It is spoken at the right time. You see, the timeliness of what we say, right? Whereas the earlier slide, right, you know, it says that, you know, so you don't find the word timeliness being mentioned here. But you see, in another discourse, you find that the Buddha further elaborate. And this particular discourse, the Buddha talks nothing but speech. It's called Vacca Sutta. Vacca means speech, right? So there are 5 things. So it's the book of 5. So whatever we want to say, it is very important that, of course, we must find the right time to say, even if it is true. Even if it is true, you find the right time to say it, okay? In Bhante Gunaratana's book, he also explained about the importance of timeliness. So I'm not going to go into details, right? Now, the other thing is, once you know that a speech that is to be spoken, it has to be timely, it has to be true, it has to be affectionate, right? Then in another discourse, the Buddha introduces 2 other elements, right? You find that the one I've colored in red, he says that he will only say something that is true, that is useful, sometimes unpleasant, but he would always say something that is true, that is useful, that is pleasant. All right. So this is where the issue of timeliness comes in. See? So when a statement is true, useful, and unpleasant, the Buddha knows the time to say it. Maybe he won't say it yet. But when he knows that the statement is true, it is useful, and it is pleasant, the Buddha will always say it. Right? So you find that the Buddhas, there's so many different discourses where the Buddha actually emphasized on the importance of speech. No wonder in the Eightfold Path, right speech, it becomes a separate step on its own. All right. So you know how important it is. Why? Because every day in our life, we have to talk. Right? We have to open our mouth. We have to say. So what is it that we say is very, very important here. All right. So that's about speech. Now, so this reminds. I'm not sure whether you have heard about this. What is called the triple filter test. So you have heard of Socrates, right? Socrates was, of course, the great philosopher, the great Greek philosopher who lives, I think, during the time of the Buddha. So it's called the triple filter test because I think that has got a lot of relevance. Maybe it summarizes actually what the Buddha was, what Socrates was saying in Greece. I think the Buddha was saying the same thing in India at that time. It's called the triple filter test. All right. So it is said that Socrates once he had this acquaintance called one of his acquaintances came up to him and said, "Do you know what I've just heard about a particular person?" And this particular person was, I think the story was Diogenes, another philosopher. All right. So this acquaintance of Socrates came to him and said, "Do you know what I've just heard about Diogenes?" Then Socrates said, "Just wait a moment before you want to tell me anything about Diogenes. I want you to pass a simple test. It's called a triple filter test." Then the acquaintance said, "What? You want me to pass a test before I can say something to you?" Socrates said, "Yes. The first one is it true?" So Socrates told his acquaintance, he said, "Yes, before you tell me, please take a moment. Please reflect and try to filter what you're going to say." So the first filter is truth. Is it true? Are you really sure about what you're going to tell me? Right? Just as today, sometimes we should ask, are you really sure before you forward a particular message or a particular WhatsApp, Are you sure? Okay, so that's the first test. Is it true? And apparently the acquaintance told Socrates, "No, I'm not sure. I do not know. It's not certain. Somebody just told me that. That's what I just heard." The next question Socrates asked his acquaintance was, "Okay, so you're not sure whether it's true. Is it good? Is it so you don't know if it's true or not? Second filter, is it something good?" And the acquaintance, like many of us, when we forward things, usually it's not good. Right? On the contrary, so you want to tell me something that is not good, something that is bad about someone, even though you're not certain if it's true, right? So that's the second filter. And what is the third filter? Is it useful? The third filter is whether it is useful. Then Socrates asks his acquaintance, "Is what you're going to tell me useful to me?" Right? If something that you're going to tell me, number one, you're not sure. Number two, is not good. And probably you're not even sure whether it's going to be useful for me or not. Why are you telling that to me? Right? So you can understand that in the context of idle chatter. All right. So gossip, for example. Sometimes we get lost. We get lost in what we are doing. All right. So what the Buddha was talking about in India around the same time, what Socrates was sharing in Greece. So I think there's a lot of similarity there. Okay. So the types of speech, right? So that's, I think, a very important part. So to summarize this part in page 108, Bhante Gunaratana says, if you want to have mindful speech, you practice speaking mindfully. You reflect, and then you ask yourself first before you speak. It's like what Socrates, the example that I gave you about Socrates. Right? Is it true? Is it kind? Is it beneficial? Does it harm anyone? And is it the right time to say? All right. So something could be true, but you can wait before you say it. All right. So is this the right time to say it? There's always a right time for everything. Okay. So that is the mindful speech part. Right. So as you can see, for us to be able to do that, it requires a fair amount of mindfulness, isn't it? And it also requires us to have the effort the effort to be reflective, to be very careful in whatever we say. And we can only do this if we have a right view of things. What is the right view? That is that all actions have consequences, and that good actions lead to good results, or or bad actions lead to bad results. Or to use Bhante Gunaratana's words, skillful actions lead to skillful results, and unskillful actions lead to unskillful results. So before we can have the effort to do that, we must have that right view. So that is why in the Buddha's teachings, the concept of right view is so very important. Yeah, and of course, be mindful. And mindfulness, as we will discuss a little bit the following week, it must always be grounded in ethics, in the what is called the morality aspects of the teachings. Okay, so that's the speech part. So we can go back and reflect on our speech. Now the second part is on action, right? So skillful action, or in the Noble Eightfold Path, I think generally you come across the word right action, right? Samma, S-A-M-M-A, Samma. Okay. So what is skillful action? So skillful actions consist of abstaining from killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. So these three, again, this morning, you recited in your 5 precepts, observing the 5 precepts. So again, it is being repeated in the Eightfold Path. Now, what Bhante Gunaratana says here in his book is that though found in the 5 precepts, their meaning in the Eightfold Path is a bit different. All right? Why? Because as far as precepts are concerned, their meaning and purpose is just not to break them. So it is kind of a couch or explained in a kind of a not to, all right, or in a negative way. Negative not in the bad meaning, but negative in the sense of what you should not do. All right. So the 5 precepts by itself did not really elaborate on what you should do, but it's found in the Eightfold Path. Okay. I think in some Buddhist temples, it is common that they not only recite what is called the 5 precepts, they also recite the 5 ennoblers, Pancha Sila, the 5 precepts, and the Pancha Dhamma. So instead of avoiding killing, what should we do? Instead of avoiding stealing, what should we do? Instead of avoiding sexual misconduct, what should we do? What is the positive aspects of that? Instead of avoiding lying, what is the positive aspect? Right speech. And then instead of just avoiding breaking the 5th precept, what should we do? Okay, so that is why in Bhante Gunaratana's book, he says, though found in the 5 precepts, the skillful action in the Eightfold Path is a bit different, because the precepts are only telling you what not to do. But we should not think that that's all that the Buddha is telling us to do. All right, but the Buddha used the precepts as a starting point for us to move on. Okay, so in the Noble Eightfold Path, the emphasis is more on the higher ethical behavior. Right. For example, it starts with the Buddha explained that any physical action that hurts another person is wrong, even if no one is killed. All right. You see, sometimes people look at the precepts in a very mechanical, in a very legalistic manner. All right. Someone will say, okay, well, I did not break the first precept of killing because the being that I tried to harm did not die. Right? Because technically, for the first precept to be broken, there are conditions, right? In fact, if you read Bhante Gunaratana's book, he also explained that there are a few conditions, right? It's only when all the conditions are fulfilled, like for example, there's a living being, there's a knowledge of a living being, the intention to kill, the act of killing, and then the being dies. Then you say you have broken the first precept. But if the being did not die, then technically you did not break the first precept. You say, I'm great. I didn't break the first precept. All right. But in the higher ethical value, that's not the case. I always remember that my first lesson in the Dhamma, way back when I was a student, when my teacher, Lompo Dhamma Banchanwood, when he taught us in Hokkien, he said, if you did not break the precept, he said, Hua Kai. Kai is precept. He said, Kai Bo Hua. But Dhamma Po Liao. If you have broken the Dhamma, you did not break the precept. So what he was trying to explain was, even you did not break the precept, so to speak, because the being did not die, but that act of killing or the thought of killing, that intention to want to kill or to harm someone, that by itself is a wrong ethical action. All right. And last week I mentioned to you, the Buddha explains in the Nibbedika Sutta, the Buddha said, what is karma? Karma is intention. So the moment you have that intention to harm someone, irrespective of whether that person that you harmed died or did not die, you have already committed a negative action, an unwholesome action, an unskillful action. So always remember that. So while precepts are very important for us to observe, don't be too legalistic, don't be too mechanical about it. For example, the precept of lying. It's also said that if you look at the conditions for the precept of lying, you have the intention to lie, but that person didn't believe you. All right? So technically, you have not broken that precept of lying. So as far as the precept is concerned, you did not break it. But you've already created a negative action. The intention, you wanted to lie, and you actually make the effort of lying, all right, through various channels. So please do not look at the precepts in a very mechanical or legalistic manner. All right? Look at the precepts in a bigger picture. All right? That is why, as I said, always look at the precepts and then look at the ennoblers, the Panchasila and the Panchadhamma. Right? So abstaining from killing reaches its highest meaning when we develop a completely non-harming attitude. So the attitude part is the intention, is a frame of mind, and continually wish for the well-being of other living beings with love and compassion. All right. So that is why the first precept of the action of not killing, all right, which is what we should not do, we should not kill. But what is the reverse? The reverse is we should instead cultivate love and compassion. All right. Like the second precept, to avoid stealing. So the positive aspects will be to be generous, to have that spirit of dana, the spirit of chaga, all right, the generous mind that we develop. Okay. Likewise, the third precept, to abstain from sexual misconduct, we should also cultivate contentment. All right. And then the fourth precept of abstain from lying, we have right speech, and right speech comes in so many different forms. It is when whatever you say must be kind, must be useful, must be timely, must be beneficial, and when it is spoken with a kind heart. So those are the positive aspects that support our precepts. Okay, so it's very important for us to understand that part. Yeah. So we abstain from killing. It reaches its highest meaning when we develop a completely non-harming attitude and continually wish for the well-being of other living beings with love and compassion. That is why, as Buddhists, we are always encouraged to cultivate what is called the four sublime states, the Brahma Viharas, isn't it? So in our everyday life, we practice loving kindness, we practice compassion, we practice joy, and we practice equanimity. Right? The first pair, for example, love and compassion. So the first pair, the first aspects of love is when we have that wish for the well-being of others. Compassion is not just wishing people well and happy, but wishing and making effort how people can be relieved from that suffering. All right, like in today's pandemic situation, so many people are in need of support. All right. So I suppose we don't even need to wait till people fly a white flag, right? If we know that somebody needs help, right? So rather than say, oh, he needs help, I just radiate loving kindness to him. That's good enough. That's not good enough, right? While it is good to radiate loving kindness, what do we do? How do we translate our compassion to help people, right? So that's the first step. So once we have done that, then what is the next attitude? Bhante Gunara talked about right attitude. What is the right attitude that should be developed in our mind? the attitude of joy, attitude of joyfulness, the attitude of feeling that, hey, it's possible to bring some happiness to other sentient beings. All right, so joy arises. So that's the third one. But sometimes your good actions, is not appreciated. People don't even say thank you to you. Right? Do you feel upset? Do you feel say, oh, I should have helped this person? No, you just practice equanimity. All right. So when the positive feedback is not coming, you don't have to feel upset about it. Then you develop equanimity. So that is why the four Brahma Viharas, they actually work like like in a cycle. All right. So then once you're equanimous, then you can go back to having love and compassion. Once you manifest your love and compassion, then you feel joyful. All right. And if people don't appreciate it, okay, then you feel equanimity. Even if people appreciate it, you can still you also feel equanimous, because that's the nature of existence. There is dukkha, and so we are a cause of trying to reduce the dukkha of other sentient beings, right? So that's having the right attitude. And I think in that chapter itself, Bhante Gunaratana explains in quite detail with a lot of examples there. And then continuing in the following page 111, Bhante Gunaratana says, we practice skillful action not because we want to avoid breaking the 5 precepts, or because we fear that someone will punish us if we do so. Now, that first sentence, or that first part, is based on right view, isn't it? So why do we practice? Why do we keep the 5 precepts? Do we practice the 5 precepts because we sign up as a member of BABS, and in one of the clauses it says that as a member I must follow the 5 precepts? I'm sure that's not the reason. We follow the 5 precepts because we understand, we have a right view, that just as we feel pain, we feel fear of death, we feel fear of being harmed, we do not want to harm someone. Just as we don't want our things to be stolen, we don't want to steal other people's things. Just as we don't want our spouse or to be unfaithful to her, so we will not be unfaithful to our spouse. So and it goes on, right? So we practice skillful action not because we want to avoid breaking the 5 precepts, or because we fear that someone will punish. So in Buddhism, there's no such thing as because you break the 5 precepts, Buddha is going to get angry with you, or the Deva is going to throw fire and brimstone at you. So that those things don't happen. All right? We avoid cruel and harmful behavior because we understand the consequences of such actions. Remember, as I said in my last session, all actions have consequences, and that's a right view. It's a right view of karma, that they lead to profound happiness for us and for everyone around us, now and in the future. We understand that this, one of the characteristics of existence, is suffering. There's a lot of suffering in this world. Should we then be a cause for additional suffering of people in this world? We should not, if we understand the nature of existence. So we should try to alleviate the suffering of other beings. So we avoid cruel and harmful behavior because we see the consequences of such actions. Okay? We practice skillful action because we want our lives to be helpful and harmonious, not destructive. So this is the second aspect of having right view, to understand that skillful action leads to skillful results, or good actions lead to good results. Okay, so because we understand that, so we will not do it for ourselves. Okay, so that's called actions and results. So in page 128, Bhante Gunaratana, I thought this was very important, so I just extracted this. He says it is relatively easy to observe the precepts and act harmoniously so long as no one provokes you. Isn't it true? When you are, you can test it out. When you are undergoing a retreat, when you are having a meditation retreat, you find that very hardly do you feel upset, isn't it? You feel angry. You don't even need to be impatient, because everything comes to you so quickly. Everything you do, people say sadhu, 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 sadhu. So you are put on a high pedestal. So how to get angry when you are in a retreat setting, when you are in a meditation? Everybody takes care of you, right? But if someone says something that angers you or hurt you, once you're back at home, once you're in your office, your mind may be spent spinning for a moment. Even if you have spent 2 weeks having a peaceful, calm, very serene retreat, all right? After you come out from it, you forgot all about it because the effort is not there, all right? The mindfulness is gone, all right? So that's why I always remember when he's during one of the teachings His Holiness gave us. He says, yes, meditation, mind training when you are in meditation, very important. Of course, no question about it, very important. But even more important is post-meditation. That means after your meditation, how you're able to apply the process that you develop and cultivate your mind during the meditation process into your daily life. That is a real challenge. That is a real challenge. Okay? So if your mind, that's where mindfulness comes in. So you maintain mindfulness not only when you are in a retreat, not only when you're in a temple. Some people, when they're in a temple, they are like an angel, isn't it? You look very kind, very nice. But the moment they're not in a temple, you're a real devil, right? So okay. So you're mindful, you'll have enough presence of mind to think. I must be careful now. Let me pause for a moment until my mind is clear. I better not say or do anything. Okay. I think previous week I shared with you one quote from Lama Atisha, which is my favorite quote, right? Lama Atisha, where he says that in the midst of many, check your speech. When alone, check your mind. Remember the one from from Lama Atisha, right? Lama Atisha is that great Indian Pandit who spent, I don't know, maybe some say 20 years in Indonesia. Right? He was learning the Dhamma under Serlingpa in Indonesia. Then he went to Tibet and he revived Buddhism in Tibet. So that's Lama Atisha. Okay, so as Lama Atisha says, so pause for a moment, right? Better not say or do anything that you regret later. Okay? Always reflect. Until your mind is fully trained, many kinds of wrong actions will occur to you. So before doing anything you know is wrong, step back and reflect mindfully on how this action might hurt you. For example, if you feel tempted to steal from your employer, first examine the consequences. Is a right view, consequences, right? All actions have consequences. Number one, you will live in fear of being caught. If caught, you will lose your job, reputation, and perhaps freedom too. Even if not caught, your conscience will catch up with you immediately. So you can reflect that. You don't have to be a great meditator, to be able to reflect that, right? So the Buddha, that is why reading the Buddhist scriptures or reading the teachings is very important for us to reflect, right? First, we listen, isn't it? When you listen, you get a certain level of wisdom, Utama panya, right? And then listening is not good enough. You must always reflect. And then you get the second level of wisdom, which is called the wisdom through reflection, Cintamaya Panya. Then when you do your meditation, then it helps you. Because that becomes something habitual. It flows. All right? So in our everyday life, whatever action that you want to do, always, as we say in mindfulness meditation, instead of reacting, learn to respond. There's a difference. When you react, unreflectively, you just react. But when you respond, there's a certain gap, a very short gap that allows you to reflect. Okay? For example, what is the consequences? What happens if I'm caught? Even if I'm not caught, the conscience will be there. Right? Always remember Lama Atisha. When you're alone, right, check your mind. Because you cannot hide from your mind. Okay? So that's on day one. So because of, okay, I'm going to go to the last part, because of the time factor, skillful livelihood, right? So there's a lot we can talk about what is livelihood. It can be one whole session, but I'm just going to leave you some questions so that you could reflect. Number one, is it an inherently wrong occupation? Will it lead me to break my precepts? And will it disturb your mind or conscience? Bhante Gunaratana has a whole chapter on skillful livelihood. So you read that, a lot of examples. He gives a lot of examples, which I don't have time to go through. But basically, to sum up, he's asking 3 questions. He's asking us to think of 3 questions. Whatever we do now in our job, is it inherently wrong occupation? Would it lead me to break my precepts? The first question leads to the second question. If this job that you are doing now, every day you are breaking your precepts, then you have to ask yourself, is that something that I want to continue? Okay? And does it disturb your mind or conscience when you come back home? When you reflect on the teachings of the Buddha, does it disturb your mind? Does it disturb your conscience? So these are the 3 questions which Bhante Gunaratana asked, which I thought I'll share with you. Right? So inherently wrong jobs. So I think he gives some examples here, just a quick one. Like manufacturing, selling weapons of destruction and poisons to kill others. Right? So if you're in that kind of for livelihood, then you got to reflect. Okay, owning or working for a casino, a gambling or alcoholic establishment. Okay, criminal activity of all kinds, black marketing, smuggling, fraud, white collar crime. Right, trying to bluff people by saying that corruption is a donation. So that is also a form of white collar crime. Okay, so you can bluff, like who was that? Was it Abraham Lincoln? You can bluff some people some of the time. You cannot bluff everybody all the time. Right? Okay, one fine day you will be caught. So then Bhante Gunaratana also asks, does your job cause you to break your precepts, even if the job is not inherently wrong? Right? So compare someone who issues driving licenses without any bribe and works with integrity to someone who only issues a license if he receives a bribe. Right? That's something many of us are familiar, isn't it? Okay? And the corrupt worker does not have skillful livelihood, but the honest one does. Okay? If your job pollutes the rivers, you must have a clear mind to decide whether continued association with this company is the most loving and compassionate thing to do. Consider how serious the incident was, whether it was a pattern, is it something that is continuously been done by the company that you're working for? Right? Ask yourself, what actions can I take with love and compassion and equanimity and concern for all these? Okay? So ultimately, I think all this question boils back to one very important point. Do we have a choice? Or do we not have a choice? Okay? And I think many of us have a choice. Many of us have a choice. But sometimes we take the convenient way out. All right? I remember many years ago, when I was actually offered a job to be the vice president of a company that was involved in gambling. Right? So I was telling myself, well, if I take this job, my salary will go up by 25%. I'll have a much bigger car, right? Okay, but would I still be able to give Dhamma talks after that? Would I still be able to tell myself that, hey, what I'm doing, is in line with what I personally believe, right? So after much reflection and soul searching, you can say, right? So I thought maybe I should forgo that. So I think we all have a choice, whether do we want or we not want it. Okay. Of course, if you tell me that you don't have a choice, then you do it. Then, if that involves breaking the first precept, then you got to make sure that you hold strongly to your 4 other precepts, right? Okay. So don't get the excuse that because you can't break, you can't keep one of your precepts, you end up breaking all the other 5 precepts. Okay. All right. So that doesn't justify. So the conclusion is, always check our thoughts, words, and actions. In all our actions, we should reflect on whether our intentions are beneficial to ourselves and others. Right? Our intention, right? Remember, in in the Buddha's teachings, the intention is the most important. And the intentions come from our mind. The first verse of the Dhammapada says, the mind is a forerunner of all things, isn't it? Isn't it true? Isn't it mentioned in the Dhammapada? So we should reflect on whether our intentions, our motivations, right, are beneficial to ourselves and others. In what we do, we are quite sure. You can even follow Socrates' triple filter test and ask yourself, is what I'm doing, is it true? Is it useful? Is it good? Right? So in this way, we check ourselves before we act. And how do we check ourselves? How do we make sure that we are able to check ourselves before we act? This is where mindfulness comes in. Right? This is where the mindfulness comes in. Of course, this is easily said. We can say, yeah, we want to do it. But why is it that we don't do it? Because we lack the mindfulness. You know this word mindfulness, sati, right? It's actually it translates from the word memory, isn't it? That means to remember to do it. Right? That's sati. We have that mind in us. So we put our sentient beings before ourselves. So those selfish feelings will not arise as much. Because if we only think about ourselves, then, of course, then your intention will be based very much on selfishness. Okay? So I thought that is a good conclusion from Bhante Gunaratana's book. So I really hope that you would get yourself a copy of the book, because it really sets out in very simple way how you can practice the Eightfold Path in very, very few difficult Pali words, right? Or simple English words that we can understand. And if there are Pali words, he explains it in very simple terms. And it was actually written very much for ordinary lay people. So I hope that book would be something that you would have, next to you and allow you to actually understand what 8 steps in the Eightfold Path is all. Okay? So I think we have about 25 minutes, right? Or 30 minutes for Q&A. So if there are any questions, I'll be quite happy to respond. Right? Or if there are any comments, please.
The first one is, if I'm working in a high-class restaurant that serves food and alcohol as the sources of income, is it a wrong livelihood?
Yeah. Could you...
Right, okay.
Could you repeat that?
Working in a high-class restaurant that serves food and alcohol a wrong livelihood?
Sorry? I can't hear you.
Oh, testing.
Sean, we couldn't hear you, Sean.
Yeah. Neither can I hear you.
Yeah. I'll just read out the question first, Brother Benny. Okay, working in a high-class restaurant that serves food and alcohol as main sources of income, is that a wrong livelihood? Well,
it depends on what level that you want to in your practice. If for example you feel that you are contributing to the promotion of alcohol, then obviously that will not be an occupation that you want to be in, right? But if you feel that you are just doing your job, you are not promoting alcohol, if people ask for it, you just offer it to them, then it's a different degree, right? So it depends on what level of practice that you want. It's just like someone saying, if I take a sip of alcohol, am I breaking my first precept? Am I breaking my 5th precept? Right? Of course, if you analyze the conditions of the precept, then you are, right? Okay. Right. So it really depends on what level you want to practice.
I think you guys can hear me better now. I hope.
Yes.
The second question is, if I'm using office stationery for personal matters like photostating or using office phone to take personal calls, working slowly to claim overtime, is it a form of stealing?
Well, the answer is if you take office stationery and use it for your own without the knowledge of the company, then obviously it is, right? But if there's an understanding that, look, like for example, you let your boss know that, hey, Nick, I'm like for example, I've got an assistant who is studying for her master's, and then she said, hey, look, I need to print some of these notes for my own studies. So she informed me. I said, yeah, by all means. So I gave her the permission to do that. Then it is not. But if she does it, especially with the with in a kind of secretive way, don't want me to know, right? Then obviously then that you are taking things that does not belong to you, right? So I think at the end of the day is one should be very open about it. One should be very transparent about it. Then there's no question about it. Okay.
Thank you, brother. The next one is a question from Facebook. Thank you so much for the sharing. How can we use the Noble Eightfold Path to see the truth of the Four Noble Truths and get enlightened from it?
Well, the fourth noble truth is actually the Eightfold Path, right? You look at the Four Noble Truths, it is actually about cause and effect, isn't it? The first noble truth is the effect. The second noble truth is the cause. The third noble truth is the effect. And the fourth noble truth is the cause. So they're actually interrelated, isn't it? So you see the fourth noble truth as what you need to do. So the cause, in other words, you practice the Eightfold Path, so that's the cause. So the effect is the third noble truth, end of dukkha, which they call nibbana. If the word nibbana sounds too far away, right? You forget that the word, what it basically means, if you practice the Eightfold Path, it leads to happiness. And third noble truth is happiness. The end of dukkha is happiness, isn't it? That is why Ajahn Brahm, he very cleverly he changed the structure of the Four Noble Truths and the third noble truth as happiness, which in my mind is not wrong, because in the Dhammapada it says, what is the highest happiness? It says Nibbanang Paramang Sukhang. Isn't it mentioned in the Buddha's teaching? Nibbanang Paramang Sukhang. So Nibbana is the highest happiness. All right. So I think, so in that I'm with Ajahn Brahm. He's not wrong when he said the third noble truth is happiness. But of course, if you are very orthodox, very traditional Buddhist, how can you say that? No. Third noble truth is Nibbana. So, again, in Buddhism, there's word called prapancha, proliferation of views. So once we are so stuck in that views, we should even let go. Right? We should not cling. We should not cling to even this. The Four Noble Truths must be explained in this way, no other way. Let's cling to it. Right? So the Eightfold Path is actually the action that we need to take that will lead us to the third noble truth. Okay, all right.
Thank you for the explanation. I hope that answers your question. The next question is that I am an accountant working in an MNC that deals with tobacco or alcohol. Is it wrong livelihood? Because an accountant doesn't deal with the sale of tobacco, but he just makes sure that the accounts are in order.
Yeah, well, I suppose as long as you don't do too much creative accounting, I suppose you'll be pretty safe. Right, but again, as I said, if you feel that by association, you are in you're working for a tobacco company, then you're promoting tobacco, right? Or you're in an alcoholic company, in an alcohol company, you're promoting alcohol. Then again, it depends on your level of practice. You have an option, isn't it? If you're an accountant, I'm sure you can find another job if you feel that it pricks your conscience. But if you feel that, look, I'm just an accountant, I'm just a bookkeeper, I just look at the numbers, then I don't get involved in sales, I don't even do any marketing of alcohol, I'm just doing a decent job, So it doesn't prick your conscience. So it depends. Right? But if you're an accountant who it is part-time, also you have to promote, you know, that particular brand of beer or alcohol that your company sell, you know, it's going to be tough. So ultimately, my answer is that we all have a choice. So we have to make that choice based on our understanding and the level of practice of the Dhamma.
Soul searching after this, if you want.
All
right. The next one is also from Zoom. Is why is the fifth precept not reflected in the right actions?
Well, the fifth precept, I think it is reflected more in the right mindfulness. Because, for example, as I said, the 5 precepts has got a parallel, right? It has got what in, I think, mainly in the Thai tradition, the word used is the Panchadhamma, right? Or the 5. So, for example, to abstain from alcohol and drugs that intoxicate the mind, what is the positive aspects of it? It's mindfulness. It's cultivating mindfulness, right? You remember I said the first one, like killing, is, you know, is what's that? Kindness and compassion. Stealing is the generosity, and then the third one, sexual misconduct, is like contentment, and the fourth one, lying, is truthful speech, and then the fifth one is abstaining from drugs and intoxicating drinks, is where we cultivate mindfulness. Because when you're mindful, then you avoid things which will kind of pollute or affect your mind. If you speak to meditators, those who are great meditators, of course not to me, right? You speak to those great meditators, you find that they'll tell you, even if, you know, even a tiny drop of alcohol can affect the concentration. I've heard this from some, you know, from teachings by some monks, you know? So or even lay people, you know, some lay people. So even a tiny drop of alcohol can actually affect their concentration.
Thank you, brother, for the answer. The final question for now is that others will take advantage of our compassion if we do not apply wisdom when doing compassionate acts. They label us as fools. So
yeah, I think you're breaking up. So how do we respond, right? I think your answer is already in your question, isn't it? You say that you must have wisdom, you see. That's why the Buddha talks about wisdom and compassion. You see? The Buddha never only talk about wisdom without compassion. The Buddha has got this epithet called the Mahakaruniko. It is said that every morning when he wakes up, you know, he would survey the world to see who is in need of help, of compassion, and he would go. But he did it with wisdom, with, you know, with understanding, with right views, right knowledge, you know. I always remember, some of you know Venerable Thupten Chodron, right? The American nun. She always said, you know, sometimes people thought that in Buddhism, if you practice Buddhism, you're supposed to practice patience, you're supposed to practice compassion, kindness, then you become a doormat. You know what's a doormat? It's for people to walk over you. He says, no, you have to stand up. You have to stand up for what is right, but stand up with kindness and compassion, not with anger or hate. Right? Are you able to do that? That calls for a developed mind. Right? Like, for example, you know, if you read you read about Buddhism, like especially like now in America, they got this issue of Black Lives Matter, about racism, about rights, you know, minority rights, and so on. So the Buddhist response is, how do we make a stand and protect, for example, minority rights, human rights, discrimination, you know, and yet not get into anger or violence and so on. How to have a peaceful, engaged approach to protecting, you know, what has been deemed as discrimination, right? So I think we need both compassion and wisdom, right? So in compassion, that is why I was listening to Ajahn Amaro's talk about wisdom and compassion, and he gave a very good example. He says when you have too much, when you think that you are veering too much into the path, into compassion, then you pull yourself back and understand the wisdom aspect of non-self, of emptiness, all right? Everything, all right? But if you only talk about emptiness, you talk about non-self, then you lack that compassionate part. So you need to have both compassion and wisdom. So both of them, they're like the two wings of a bird. Without one, you cannot fly, right? So whatever we do to help people, we must do it with a lot of wisdom, right? For example, helping, if a beggar comes to you, and then that beggar smells of alcohol, and then he asks you for another 5 ringgit. Would you give him that 5 ringgit? I wouldn't. I'll give him some food. I will give him some food. I'll say, hey, look, are you hungry? If you're hungry, I'll buy food for you. I'm not going to give you 5 ringgit because I think I'll give you that 5 ringgit. You may go and get yourself another bottle of toddy. So I will not do that. But I do that not because I'm angry with you, but I do that because I have compassion for you. Because I think if I do that, it's going to make it worse for you. So how are we able to cultivate that kind of right attitude? Right? Just now there was that slide from Bhante G's book. How do we have cultivated aspects of right attitude? Okay.
Thank you, Brother Benny. I think just to summarize, wisdom and compassion go hand in hand. You need both. Right? Yeah. It's not mutually exclusive. All right. The final question we have for today is that, can we say that by breaking the 5th precept, we will break the other 4?
Well, there's a Tibetan story. I'm sure you have heard of the Tibetan story, isn't it? That there was this story that this Tibetan person, he believes that the first 4 precepts are important. The 5th precept not so important. It's okay. Drinking is okay. So then he will drink. So what happens? He got drunk. When he got drunk, then as he was coming back, then he saw he saw the neighbor's daughter. Then he raped the neighbor's daughter. Right? So, and then he came back. Then the wife asked him, "Where did you go?" He said, I went out with some friends. So he broke the precept of lying. Right? Then when the neighbors came and came barging to the house and said, "Hey, look, did you do this terrible thing?" He said, no, he broke the precept again, but in his fits of drunkenness, anger, he killed the neighbor. So he broke the first precept. So it's a simple Tibetan story, which tells you that don't underestimate the importance of the precept of the 5th precept. So I think that's one reason why the Buddha mentioned it as one of the 5 precepts. Even though it is not specifically mentioned in the Eightfold Path, but it is mentioned in many other suttas in it. For example, in the Sigalovada Sutta, I think it's mentioned. In the Parabhava Sutta, the discourses on downfall. One of the factor for downfall is also alcoholism, and then I think it's also mentioned in the Dikajana Sutta, right, where the Buddha talked to Dikajana, right, the layman. So there are a fair number of discourses where the Buddha talks about the importance of avoiding alcohol, right, the 5th precept. Okay, so I think that we should not think that, because it's not mentioned in the 8 precepts, then we should avoid it.